But as Christy said, we do have a caller on the line. We have Stephen from Arizona, and he wants to talk about reality dating shows. So let's bring Stephen on, and let's get Stephen on. Hello, Stephen. Can you hear us? You are on
Hi.
Secular Sexuality. What would you like to talk about with the
Yes,
four of
I
us
can hear
tonight?
you. Well, I'll still talk about it. I was originally going to ask what you thought about loneliness in society and how much this plays into it, but I wanted to make a couple of comments on some of the things that you've mentioned. I noted when you were talking about LGBT representation, I remember a reality show at one point where there was a woman with 3 men. Only one of the men was actually single. One of the men was married, and then the third man was gay. And they were all competing to trick her at the same time. So she would win if she picked the straight guy, but anybody of the others
Single
could
guy,
win
yeah.
if they were picked, which I don't think that lasted very long, and I don't think it was helpful for anybody's representation, but that was something that came to mind. And the other, alongside of that, I think all of these dating shows, because of the majority of the population, tend to be very heteronormative in their approaches, and it's hard to have LGBT representation on a show like 90 Day Fiancé if they can't come into the country even if they get married or they're engaged. You know, like that wasn't a thing in the United States at one point. So I think there's some difficulties with that. And to Miss O'Kiss, I don't know if there's an easier way to say your name, to her points, as far as the casting and how some of these things work out, again, I think it's hard to cast an entire gay storyline or bisexual storyline or pansexual storyline. I mean, the casting across the board would be kind of all over the place. So if you're really trying to create a story, I think that's one of the difficulties. But what I really wanted to bring up was sort of to Ashley's point and some of the other points that you all have made about the people watching these shows and living vicariously. I know from the younger people that I talk to, they're not dating as much. There's statistical evidence they're less interested in sex. I know young people who don't know how to walk up to each other in a bar or a club because they're so used to these apps. And I wonder, my concern with some of these reality things, because they are so scripted and they are so agenda driven in some ways, that they're giving a false impression of how we should relate to each other. Like, I go back far enough with the reality genre to The Real World, where getting a gay...
Ooh, yes, The Real World.
And it was a whole different way, and it really felt more, and when you talk to the people years later, it didn't get scripted until much later in its run, but early on, it was a fly on the wall. And like you've all said, relationships are messy, dating is messy, all of those things. It's hard to pick somebody like this person is going to be interesting. So I understand the challenge because it is still entertainment. And I'm glad you're all making the point that it is entertainment less so than reality. But I worry about like the incels and people who are just socially awkward, not just because they might naturally be that way, but because we've made everybody so reliant on apps. I mean, I was really relating to Miss O'Kiss meeting people on the internet way back in the day because we kind of hid it. If we did that, we tried to let me wait until the first time I actually met them in person, and that'll be our meeting story. Not that we met online and talked for 3 months. So it's hard with reality, I think, to depict reality. And the only other thing I'll say, and then I'll stop talking because I ramble, Christy. The other part of it is I think fiction has a lot more influence in some ways. If we could have more or less heteronormative fiction with more LGBT characters to show what really goes on, because I think it can still be very compelling, and that's how we've done things better in society for ourselves over the previous decades. So, okay, now I'll shut up, and I really like to hear what you think.
Yeah, I just want to weigh in quickly and say that I do think that there's an interesting question to be asked about why these are becoming more popular as we are changing the way that we date, as we are sort of shifting from only dating people who live in your neighborhood or who your parents know to meeting strangers on the internet, and how reality dating may be a way of sort of coping with that. Michael Pollan writes about how viewership for food-related shows and cooking shows and competition shows and all of these things dramatically increases inversely to the amount of time we spend cooking ourselves. The less we're cooking, the more likely we are to be watching TV about cooking for whatever reason that makes sense to our weird, primitive monkey brains.
I feel called out.
There's something here. Yeah.
I would say that as someone who was a professional chef, I would avoid like the plague cooking shows because it was like a busman's holiday. So
yeah, there's a stressfulness to
it. Right. I will say though, I think like one comment you made, Stephen, about people thinking that is how things work. That is actually a trend I have noticed a lot. I used to do a lot of work with AVEN, like the Asexual Visibility and Education Network. And one of the things that would be like answering, like questions people would send in. And somehow, I guess through my social media, I became like the inbox of people with questions. And a lot of people do seem a little at a loss because I think, like, especially for maybe older people, but people are watching these shows and there's a certain shorthand used in both these dating shows and in fiction, actually. Like, we don't, like, for example, the idea of like, I saw this person, I wanted to have sex. It's like a shorthand. Everybody is supposed to understand that there was more to it than look, bang. Like, and it's kind of like almost like a symbol because, the actual story of, we talked on the phone and then we did this, and it's very tedious and long. So there's this short form, but a lot of people, because people aren't having these conversations with their parents, these conversations aren't happening in school, and you've got the whole, playground learning. So it's just people bigging themselves up and it's all bravado and not real. But a lot of people there are a lot of people who don't recognize the shorthand as shorthand and are becoming very confused and lost. Like, a lot of people are like, I don't think I experienced XYZ because I have never wanted to give a girl a rose. And I'm like, well, that's actually not a prerequisite for romance.
No.
That is a stand-in symbol. But again, like, that has to have a cultural background and understanding, which is not being put out there. So a lot of people are looking at these things and saying like, this is how it works. And it's like, no, it's like when you draw a stick figure, you look at it and you're like, this is a human, but really it's just 5 sticks in a circle. But you look at the 5 sticks in a circle and you're like, yeah, that's a stand-in for people. But like, you've got to have that background knowledge. And I think a lot of that is missing. Like, if you look at coming of age TV shows or movies, how much of those relationships are actually built about people being interested in each other versus, I wanted to bang and then hijinks until banging. Like, but that's not relationships. But a lot of people do see that and think that is the fullness of it. And I think reality TV maybe contributes to that. Also, maybe doesn't a little bit, because you do see some of those awkward conversations of, well, I'm very, very Christian. Well, I'm an atheist. Oh dear. Like, and that's some of, the kind of, it's missing from the shorthand again. Like, we don't see those conversations unless it's a big plot point. So maybe they can fill in some of the gaps. I don't think they do a good job of it at the moment, because a lot of it is, you were a llama and now you're a person, smush. But it's like, but yeah, I think the way we describe relationships in media, period, really needs to be improved, because those conversations, I don't think, are happening, interpersonally. I think especially people who are a little more awkward, if you don't have a lot of very close friends that you're going to have these very honest conversations with. And I could be I'm one of the people a lot of the times, like, I don't do well with a lot of those conversations. I don't have a lot of, shared experience to draw from. So I can see how a lot of people who don't have those friendships, aren't having those conversations, can be affected by this kind of thing. Because again, like, there's no one filling in the rest of the shorthand. Like, and yeah, I think I think reality TV could definitely help there as much as it can hurt. And I think media in general, we need to do a better job of relationships are more than just this simple A to B.
Sure.
I don't know if that was
Yeah, and
germane or I
I'll
just went
say,
off on
oh,
one.
sorry. No, I was just going to say that the romance part is really important. The story I like to tell, so you get to hear it, is the most romantic thing someone ever did for me was take me to a petting zoo, which sounds really strange.
No, he doesn't.
But
So
he knew,
cute.
he knew I loved petting zoos and I loved animals and petting the animals, and I had been really stressed out. And it was not his favorite thing to do, for sure. And he took me to a petting zoo and handed me a bunch of food, and he sat on a bench and watched me feed goats and sheep and whatever else was there. And to me, that was the most loving, romantic thing he could have possibly done. It was perfectly timed. It was beautiful. And then the only other comment I'll have, and then I'll let you all move on to other things because I'm boring. I would love to see, because of the landscape of the world, one of the reality shows that I think would really help, I mentioned about 90 Day Fiance. If we had a show like that, where there was an LGBT couple trying to be together across international borders or something like that, not just how their families deal with it, but what the legal stuff really becomes and what the violent threats could be, and some of those things that they really live with, that's real and not sugar-coated. I would like to see something like that because I think it would be really educational to the public. I think it would be helpful to perceptions of my particular cohort, but just in general, because in some cases it doesn't just apply to LGBT people. Sometimes there are real difficulties. Because like you said, you the two of you, Phoebe and Miss, talked about what really goes on when you want to emigrate for your partner or for any other reason, and all of these embassy visits, and it's so sugar-coated. And again, one of them I watched, they just met and they had sex immediately, talking about A to B, and it was like, how did you do that? I mean, that's just insane to me. But leaving that aside, because
we normally call those things one-night stands.
No, but like, how did you do that? Can you walk me through it very carefully?
Yeah, really. So and was it for the cameras or, implication or what have you? But so anyway, those were my thoughts, and I appreciate yours. And so thank you very much.
Anyway,
thanks so much for calling.
And that petting zoo story was so gorgeous. I'm like,
So
I love
cute.
petting zoos.
Oh, I love it.
Oh, well, that was a brilliant call. That was.
It was.
It was lovely. Yeah.
I hope my boyfriend's taking notes.
Sure.
Ready for a petting zoo, a cat cafe of some sort.